Act 1. Hook. The phone rang in the marble lobby like a bird that wouldn't quit one sharp note after another, and everyone pretended not to hear it, like ignoring a cough in a fancy restaurant, like pretending a storm isn't coming. Maria Vega had been on her knees picking up a fallen lipstick and a set of keys when the woman in the power suit snatched the phone out of a stranger's hands and spat, "Don't touch that. We pay you to mop, not manage." Maria froze, water dripping from her yellow gloves, and you could feel the room slow down, like someone hit the pause button on respect on decency. For 3 years, she'd been facilities on a plastic badge invisible in plain sight, but when that handset kept screaming for attention, something in her said, "Pick it up." You know what I mean? Yeah, that happened. Act 2. Rising action and turning point. 30 minutes later, it happened again. The receptionist was on break. The chairs at the desk sat empty, and the phone kept ringing until Maria wiped her hands on a towel set the mop against the marble and walked over. Her thumb hovered for a second because old habits are sticky because people like her have been trained to make themselves small, but she lifted the receiver and said, "Northbridge Partners, how may I help you?" The voice on the other end exploded in fast, furious French. Not the kind you learn from a phrase book, the kind that peels off a Parisian accent like it was braided. $1 million deal was unraveling a client threatening to pull out, and the person who should have answered, the person with the title on a card, was nowhere. Maria listened. She calmed the man, scooped up details, corrected a contractual misunderstanding about building codes, and for the first time in a long time, felt herself slide into work she'd always done in secret, the kind of work that speaks in other people's tongues. She put him on hold, picked up the second line, German, then switched to Portuguese for a São Paulo team, then Russian for a manufacturing partner in Moscow. And by the time she hung up, people were gathered like a crowd around a slow-motion accident. The woman who had humiliated her earlier stepped out of the elevator coffee cup, poised, watched with the other employees' jaws slack. "Who are you?" the vice president demanded, and Maria's hands trembled. "Maria Vega," she said, "night shift facilities, and I can help you." He barked orders, and her name was dragged from plumbing and trash bins into conference rooms she had only ever cleaned at midnight. They shoved a chair at her in a glass-walled room that smelled of leather and strong coffee, hit the speaker button, and for 2 hours she unraveled a tangle of miscommunications in more languages than anyone in that room expected a janitor to know. After the calls, they did what people do when they realize they've been wrong. They tried to fix it quickly. "Stay late," the vice president told her. "We need to talk about your future." But Maria wasn't naive. She knew promotions weren't handed like napkins. She'd applied for openings. Translation assistant, client liaison. She counted the rejection emails like fingernails 17 times. The automated system spat her resume back because it said no degree. Her education was the night shift. YouTube lectures, audiobooks, practice with guests who stayed for weeks. A father who used to tell her language was a bridge and then died when she was 12. That bridge had made her who she was, but systems didn't see bridges unless they were certified. The next days moved fast and tight. They put Maria in a suit, a thrifted number she bought between shifts, and sat her at a private dinner with a pair of old-school textile manufacturers who only spoke regional Italian. She didn't just translate. She navigated dialects, referenced weaving terms the owner hadn't heard in English for decades, and by dessert, the contract was signed, pens, scratching handshakes exchanged. One executive leaned across the table and said quietly, "You should be paid double." Maria smiled because she knew how to accept praise and still keep her feet on the ground. But not everyone was happy. The woman who'd grabbed the phone, Veronica Lane, filed a complaint about procedural irregularities, like the bureaucracy could erase how she'd treated someone 3 years earlier. Another manager complained about fairness. "We promoted a cleaner. What about people who went to school?" The office air filled with that brittle kind of moral panic where dignity collides with entitlement. A junior analyst, Zoe, pulled Maria aside and whispered, "They've been using my Korean for months off the record translating for clients. No credit, no pay." Maria realized she was not an outlier, but a symptom, a whole pipeline of ignored talent. Management did something rare. They listened, if only because it was inconvenient not to. They audited talent, they ran skills surveys, and the numbers told a story that embarrassed everyone. Several employees spoke additional languages, some had advanced degrees, others were former professionals displaced by life. They created a pilot role, multilingual communications lead, offered Maria a salary that tripled her cleaning pay, and set up a continuing education fund so people could finish degrees while working. The policies were crisp, but the real change was softer. Maria kept her old badge in a drawer like a relic to remember what invisible felt like so she could find it in others. Act 3. Resolution and open question. The real test came with crisis. A factory collapse overseas sent shockwaves. A client's plant had fallen apart and 35 people were dead. The CEO flew in grief raw and public cameras and angry families waiting. Maria was called in at dawn, her Romanian rusty but quick enough her German steady her French and Arabic present where needed. For 6 hours, she orchestrated translation, rewrote statements so they sounded human rather than legal, guided the CEO to say what the grieving families needed to hear. Acknowledgement, not spin. She negotiated compensation framework, set up a memorial fund, and in the middle of it, the CEO stood and bowed. A small, formal thing, but it meant he'd seen her as more than a temporary fix. "You made us human," he said, and for Maria, the words landed like a verdict and a benediction. A month after that, in a company town hall packed with 300 employees and live streams from international offices, the CEO announced a new initiative named for Maria, the Vega Initiative. A company-wide skills audit, a $10 million continuing education fund, human review boards to look past resume filters. Maria walked up to the stage to a standing ovation. She never expected the same crowd that had once stepped over her in the lobby. She held the new badge they placed on her, Director of Global Communications, and she said something that caught everyone. "I'm not here because I'm exceptional. I'm here because somebody finally looked." It was a satisfying kind of victory, but not a perfect one. Veronica apologized and applied for a role in Europe, and some people were resentful, whispering about shortcuts and procedures. A few argued you can't base hiring on feelings. Others cheered. The company had changed policies, but the culture, the slow grinding habits people have, would take longer. Maria still kept that old badge framed on her wall, a reminder and a warning. Here's the thing, I want you to take with you talent hides in places we don't bother to look under uniforms and behind job titles. Systems that filter by paper credentials are lazy and sometimes cruel, because they assume everybody follows the same path. Maria's story isn't a fairy tale about instant justice, it's a map of how one moment, a ringing phone and act of courage, can expose a bigger problem and start a fix. But it also raises the hard question. Who pays for the years someone like Maria spent invisible, who apologizes for the promotions they couldn't get because an algorithm said no? So I'm asking you, right now, what will you do when you walk past someone in a uniform? Will you look up, ask one question, learn one name? If you manage hiring, will you test your resume filters, or will you keep trusting them to be fair? Drop your take in the comments. Is this the right kind of fix or just a bandage? Have you ever been overlooked because of your job title, or have you ever dismissed someone who later surprised you? Tell us, argue, disagree. Share what you've seen because we need these conversations. Messy, uncomfortable, honest. If this story landed with you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that make us look up from our own little lives. And if you are the person who feels invisible right now, hear this. Your moment may come like a phone ringing in a lobby, unexpected and loud, and when it does, pick it up. Your voice matters.